Do I need to paint my minis in order to enjoy a game? Hey guys, it's Kris from the Reformed Grognard, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of painting. I am a big fan of miniature games and miniature wargaming and miniatures with RPGs and everything else, but I have, now that we're starting to get into like the more modern board games, that's become something that has become a little overwhelming for me, because I find painting super relaxing from a painting standpoint and from a action standpoint. It's a hobby for me. I do art for a living, and so being able to sit down and paint minis for fun is a way for me to kind of paint and be artistic without actually working per se. However, now that we started collecting a lot of new board games, it's become a lot harder for me to keep up with everything. I have literally hundreds of unpainted miniatures right now, and some of them are from games that we enjoy playing, but we don't play a ton. And while there's nothing wrong with playing with boring, plain plastic miniatures, they are a little boring. I came from a toy collecting and comic collector background. I'm a hoarder, unfortunately. That's something I'm working on. But having unpainted miniatures to me isn't the same as having fun painted miniatures when you're playing. So I've kind of worked up a little bit of a compromise that I really like. I met a guy named Mike who was at the Salt Lake Gaming Con, was helping out at a booth across from us, and he showed me a painting style he uses for his miniatures that's sort of a grayscale, toned, sundown, shadowed method of painting, and I really, really liked it. I looked at his for a while. I asked him about some of his techniques, and we've tweaked it just a little bit for ours, but we call it the NOIR painting style, just because I like noir and it's cool sounding. But we decided to try it out for a little while and see how I feel about it, because what I wanted was something that makes the miniatures look more than just plain plastic, but isn't so far as full color painted miniatures. So I definitely am only going to use this on games where I know I'm never going to end up painting them, because it is quite a few layers on top of it. It changes the look of the miniatures in a way that I really like, but I can understand that it's not feasible if you plan on doing something to them later. So what I did was I took a game, The Adventurers, which I really like. It's a fun game. It's like Indiana Jones in a board game. This is the Temple of Chak. They have another one that I have not been able to find because it's crazy expensive. One of the designers on this actually worked on the Conan miniatures game and the Batman Gotham City Chronicles as well more recently. Their miniatures are super elaborate, they're intricate, they have a lot of little detail to them, but they also aren't the type of miniature that you use for other things. A lot of my minis that I use regularly that I plan on painting, we use in multiple other games. Like a lot of the Touch of Evil minis we use in Shadows of Brimstone, or we use them in our Streetlights and Shadows Noir RPG that I'm developing. So there's some of them that have this multi-use to them. And the Adventures, while very pulpy and era appropriate, they're a little too over the top. They're a little too exaggerated. The women are all super busty va-va-voom, unfortunately, which I don't necessarily mind, but I do think this is a little over the top. So what we're doing with the noir paint style, I wanted something that was really simple, really easy to do, and really fairly quick, all things considered. You can do a dozen of these in a couple of hours if you don't count dry time. So what you do starting is you prime your minis in black. I use Army Painter black because, well, I don't know any better. It's the only primer I've used since we started repainting miniatures again. However, I do really like it. It gives a nice flat black. There's a little bit of almost a silk finish to it, but I think it looks really nice, and it covers really well. Then what we do after that's nice and dry, which doesn't take long, it also dries really quick, I use 2 rattle can primers on top of that. I know there's some controversy about using rattle cans on miniatures, and this is kind of the point of no return with the minis, because it is a little thicker, and it's something that you can't really just paint over the top of later. So if you want to try this style, I would recommend trying it on a game that you don't plan on ever painting necessarily, and see if you like it. So what we start with is kind of a red-brown paint. This one's a little more red than I would like it to be. This is the Claret Wine Red from Rust-Oleum. You want a satin or a flat finish for this. I think for my next ones I'm going to find a can that's a little more brown. You don't want it super brown. A little bit of red is really nice in there, because what this paint style does is it gives it kind of a old statue look. It really makes the details in the mini pop. But it gives it just a touch of color kind of in the shadows and in the recesses as well, and it's all the better for that. But this one's a little too red. I think I need to find something that's a little browner, but it also is a color that you don't see much of, so you can use what you have if you want to. After that one's dry, and you shoot the mini at a 45-degree angle with this guy here, that gives you a nice even angle. It still leaves all of the underside and the shadowed areas black from the primer, but this gives it just a little bit of a pop of color in these slightly raised areas. Then once that's dry, you take a nice flat camo olive color. This one is literally just called Camouflage Flat. It's super flat. It also covers really well. It's also an any angle spray bottle, which actually works unlike some of the other Rust-Oleums. And I pop that on the top and spray the top of it. Once that's done, you're pretty much ready to paint at that point. So we're going to cut to the video of me doing the next layer applications on this, and when we come back around, we'll finish up and show you the finished minis. So the first step, once you have all of your spray dried completely, I would recommend giving it a solid 12 to 24 hours to make sure the spray paint's 100% dry. I started in on the dry brushing. I do a heavier dry brush first using Army Painter's Mummy Robes, and this one I'm basically just hitting it anywhere that the olive paint was. I'm not necessarily trying to overlap the olive or cover the olive. I'm just sort of using it as a guide, but if some of the green peeks through, that's totally fine. I'm also using it in a couple of spaces, kind of strategically depending on where it lands, just where I feel like it needs a little bit of a highlight, or if the red's a little too prominent still. I can do a lighter dry brush here with the Mummy Robes and kind of dull it, hide it a little bit, make it a little more subtle. The whole point on this is to just really enhance the details on these. We're not trying to hit a perfect zenithal lighting effect or cover 100% of the model with a certain amount of layering or anything like that. You just want to make everything really pop. Make sure you keep your brush really dry. Dry it off on the paper towel. I like to use the blue shop towels for basically everything we do. They're a little more absorbent, but their texture is great for getting a good dry brush going as well. Once you're pretty happy with that, you can swap it out and do the top dry brushing on there. This, because we're keeping it so thin, it dries really quickly. So then you move on to the matte white, and as always with Army Painter, we shake everything really well beforehand. And as you can see, I am using a candle holder with corks for my model holder. I know there's all sorts of really nice handmade ones out there, and like Citadel and a few of those guys have their own handles, but I find this fairly efficient because I can set it in to dry really easily, but I can still pull it out and hold it with a smaller stand. These guys are a little awkward because their bases are so small, but I decided not to rebase them. All I did was a baking powder or baking soda and super glue base to them. And then this last dry brush here is just a really light, pure white dry brush on the main light points on this, just hitting all the really highest edges, the surfaces on it, just make everything look really vivid and stand out a lot better. A few places like the hem of his coat, I went a little heavier than I normally would. I also switched to a softer brush for a few of them just to really give a little bit of a shine to the edges on there. I decided later to do a wash on these so it doesn't make as much of a difference here. Honestly, you could have skipped this step and done it after the wash, but I'm still kind of learning this paint method right here, so I went ahead and did both first. And once you're done with him, you do all the rest of them. For the tone, I used Army Painter Quick Shade Soft Tone, and this is again kind of a step that you could have totally skipped if you really wanted to. I decided to do it just to kind of emphasize some of the darker areas, kind of tone down that red a little bit. I don't know if I will do it next time I do this technique. I'm not sure. I do like the look of it. It gives it a little bit of an aged appearance, and it did emphasize a few things. But I am doing all of my painting out in my studio, which is essentially a big wooden shed on our property, and it was rather warm. I noticed the shade actually dried awfully quickly, and in a few places it left a little bit of that tea staining, coffee stain look, which I'm not a huge fan of, but generally it ended up looking really nice. I'm torn on which way I prefer. I may, on the next game, do a couple with the wash and a couple with just the dry brush and see which way looked better. Either way, if you did do the dry brush in the previous one, this tones it down a significant amount on that matte white dry brush, and you're going to want to do another quick dry brush after this is dry. Make sure it's fully dry, just to make the edges pop again. It definitely washed out a lot of those white details that I had on there. Once you're finished with your minis and you're happy with how they look, obviously some of these steps are optional. You could go a lot lighter, a lot less applications if you'd like, but one thing that is essential, especially because they're being played in a miniatures game and your fingers are going to touch them, greasy, grimy people. I always coat everything I do, especially now that I started doing minis again, with a crystal clear gloss coating, then a satin or matte pop on the top of that. I like the matte look, but it's not as strong as the gloss finishes, so I always start with the gloss first, coat that, and then dull it down with a matte or satin finish. I use the Krylon acrylic coatings because it's artist grade. You have to get this at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's or somewhere like that. It's a little more expensive, costs like $10 a can. However, those stores always have coupons, and like literally always have coupons. I think I got each of these for about $5. The plus of these, I use these in my art prior to this to coat acrylic paintings and that kind of thing, because these don't yellow. They're an archival finish as opposed to a lot of the construction grade sealers and primers and stuff that will yellow. If you're doing tabletop, landscape, miniature buildings, that kind of thing, the other stuff's fine. It's not going to do anything, but like that Minwax polyurethane can yellow over time, especially if you store them in an area that the sun hits them. So I always start with the Krylon Crystal Clear, and then I finish off after that's dried. Give it a good solid 10 hours at least to dry to a nice, easy, solid finish. Then hit it with the matte finish, which will dull it out. It doesn't yellow still, but it's not as glossy and shiny. So anyway, I hope you like them. Here's the minis. Now that they're all finished up and ready to rock and roll, they look good. I think for the future, I will base them in something other than the dark gray. That was a mistake on my part. I think going with just a nice matte black instead would have looked better. Or possibly like a sandy gray finish to them. That is, it probably would have fit the game a little better. I don't know why I went with the gray on these. Other than that, I really love the way these look. I can't wait to pull out some other games, give them a try, see what they look like. Thanks for watching. This is the Reformed Grognard. As always, you can hit our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/deeplydapper, where you can get little extra behind-the-scenes stuff. We're still kind of working out how our Patreon works right now. This is all very new to us. So if you guys have any suggestions of what you'd like to see, hit us up. Send me a message. You can flash me an email. I have contact info on deeplydappergames.com if you would like to go there. You can also listen to our podcasts over there on the website. We've got 2 right now. There's going to be a Grognard one starting up and one called The Long Con to cover my trips around the country as a con artist as well. So anyway, I hope you like it. I hope you like the video. I hope you like this new method of painting. I think it's really cool. It's a really neat way of getting your minis tabletop ready without color. I mean, really all you need for this is... so all I used on this, if you ignore the failed gray that I used on it, I used mummy robes for the off-white and matte white for the white with a bit of soft tone as the toning on there. That's all I used. It's super easy. You can get away with 2 colors and a tone, and you don't even need the tone on there. I think it would have looked fine had I not done that. It just kind of browned it out a little bit. But anyway, thanks for watching. May you live in interesting times.